They thought they had seen everything: Pearl Harbor, Midway, the crushing waves of B-29s above their skies. But when the Americans unleashed a new weapon, a weapon so terrifying it turned entire cities into oceans of fire, Japanese soldiers, civilians, and commanders alike stood in horror. This wasn't the atomic bomb. This was something different, something designed not to simply destroy but to burn. America's napalm bombs. Tonight, we dive into the story of how napalm was unleashed on Japan, and why it shocked not only the Japanese military but the entire world. It was 1944. The war in the Pacific had reached a brutal stalemate. Island after island had been consumed by bloody battles: Saipan, Guadalcanal, Peleliu. Each victory for the Allies came at a staggering cost, as Japanese defenders fought to the last man. American generals knew, if they were to bring Japan to its knees, they couldn't just fight on beaches and jungles forever. They had to strike at the heart of the empire. And here lies the dark secret. Most Japanese industry wasn't built in large armored factories like in Germany. Instead, weapons, ammunition, and aircraft parts were often produced in small family-run workshops, tucked into the crowded neighborhoods of Tokyo, Nagoya, and Osaka. Destroying these hubs meant destroying the very homes and communities in which they were hidden. This new weapon had been developed just a few years earlier in 1942 by a team of scientists at Harvard University, led by Louis Fieser. Unlike conventional incendiaries, napalm was thick, sticky, and horrifyingly effective. Once ignited, it clung to surfaces: wood, metal, even human skin, burning at temperatures that could melt through steel. For military planners, napalm wasn't just another bomb. It was a nightmare made real, a way to turn enemy cities into infernos. And in the Pacific, where so many Japanese homes were built of wood and paper, napalm promised devastation on a scale the world had never seen. The first to face this firestorm were not the Japanese, but the Germans. Allied bombers had already experimented with incendiary raids on Hamburg and Dresden, unleashing firestorms that consumed tens of thousands of lives. But in Japan, where entire cities were tinderboxes, the effect would be magnified 100-fold. American commanders knew it, Japanese civilians feared it, and soon, Japanese soldiers would witness it firsthand. By late 1944, the B-29 superfortress was the new king of the skies. With the capture of the Mariana Islands, these massive bombers were now within range of the Japanese homeland. General Curtis LeMay, the ruthless commander of the 21 Bomber Command, faced a grim reality. High-altitude precision bombing wasn't working. The jet streams above Japan scattered bombs, targets were missed, and Japanese industry continued to function. He stripped the B-29s of their heavy defensive guns to carry more incendiary bombs. He ordered them to fly low at night to avoid Japanese radar. And he loaded them not with explosives, but with napalm. The Japanese had braced themselves for explosives, for shrapnel, for destruction from the sky. But when the first waves of napalm fell, what they saw defied imagination. Buildings didn't just collapse, they ignited. Fire spread from house to house, street to street, until entire neighborhoods were swallowed in roaring walls of flame. For many Japanese civilians, there was no escape. Firestorms created their own weather systems, sucking oxygen from the air and pulling people into the inferno. Survivors would later recall the sound, not just of bombs, but of the fire itself, a monstrous roar that seemed alive. On the ground, Japanese soldiers tasked with civil defense were overwhelmed. They carried buckets of water, sandbags, bamboo spears, laughable tools against napalm that clung to everything it touched. Men and women alike stared in disbelief as the flames leapt from rooftops, faster than they could react. One survivor of Tokyo later described the scene. It was as if the entire city was burning at once. The sky was red, the streets were rivers of fire. We had no weapons against it, and this was only the beginning. The United States had discovered a weapon that could reduce Japan's greatest cities to ashes in a single night. For the Japanese military, this was more than a strategic problem. It was psychological. Napalm was not just a bomb, it was a message. Resistance would bring fire, fire that devoured everything in its path. But how exactly did the campaign escalate? How did America use napalm to break Japan's will? And what did the Japanese leaders think when they realized this new weapon was unlike anything they had faced before? To understand the full shock, we must step into the nights when Japan's cities turned into blazing hellscapes. Nights when tens of thousands perished in hours. Nights when napalm revealed its true horror. In the closing months of 1944, the war in the Pacific had reached its most desperate stage. Japan's once mighty empire was shrinking. The Allies had retaken the Philippines, and American submarines strangled Japan's supply lines. Yet despite starvation and shortages, Japanese factories still turned out planes, ships, and weapons. General Curtis LeMay, the hard-nosed commander of the U.S. bomber force, was under pressure from Washington. He needed results. The high-altitude bombing strategy, modeled after Europe, had failed. Japan's jet streams scattered bombs like seeds in the wind. Precision bombing wasn't destroying the small scattered industries buried in civilian neighborhoods. Something had to change. LeMay's solution was as daring as it was ruthless. He would burn Japan into submission. The Americans had been experimenting with incendiary bombs for years. Standard thermite and magnesium worked, but napalm was different. This sticky jelly gasoline mixture, packed into cluster bombs, spread flames farther and hotter than anything before it. The Harvard team that had created napalm in 1942 could scarcely have imagined how it would be used. During its early testing, soldiers witnessed its horrifying properties. Once ignited, it clung to targets, continuing to burn no matter how hard one tried to extinguish it. On sand, on water, even on living flesh, napalm was merciless. By late 1944, these experiments were weaponized into M69 incendiary bomblets, small canisters of napalm packed into larger cluster bombs. Each B-29 could carry thousands of them. When dropped, the cluster would burst open in midair, scattering hundreds of fire bombs across an area the size of a city block. The effect was devastating. The first test of LeMay's new firebombing tactics came in February 1945 against the city of Kobe. American planners knew Kobe was one of Japan's key industrial hubs, a port city, heavily populated, with industries woven tightly into residential districts. The raid was unlike anything the Japanese had seen before. Instead of high-flying formations, the B-29s came in low, at altitudes between 5,000 and 9,000 feet. They were stripped of most defensive guns, allowing them to carry maximum payloads of incendiaries. And instead of daylight, they struck at night. For the people of Kobe, the experience was apocalyptic. In a matter of hours, entire districts burned. Eyewitnesses described walls of flame cutting off escape routes, as the napalm clung to houses and spread fire at terrifying speed. The Japanese were stunned. This was not the slow, methodical destruction of explosives. This was a weapon designed to annihilate the very environment people lived in. Civil defense in Japan was already stretched thin. Fire brigades had little equipment beyond buckets, hand pumps, and bamboo ladders. Water supplies were limited. Against napalm, none of it mattered. Flames spread too fast. Temperatures were too high. We had prepared for bombs that exploded, not for bombs that burned. When the fires came, they joined together into one giant fire. It was no longer possible to fight. And this was only the beginning. The Kobe raid proved the concept. LeMay's strategy worked. The Americans now had proof that napalm could turn Japanese cities into death traps. In the weeks that followed, the campaign escalated. Nagoya, Osaka, and other industrial centers were targeted. Each time the fire spread faster, hotter, deadlier. Each time Japanese citizens and soldiers were left in shock, realizing their cities were defenseless tinderboxes against this new American weapon. But nothing, not Kobe, not Osaka, could prepare Japan for what was about to happen next. On the night of March 9, 1945, General LeMay launched the most ambitious incendiary raid in history. Over 300 B-29 bombers took off from the Marianas. Their target, the beating heart of Japan, Tokyo. Napalm was about to unleash a firestorm that would kill more people in a single night than even the atomic bombings to come. For the Japanese, this was the night they would truly understand the horror of America's new weapon. It was just past 10 p.m. when the first wave of B-29 bombers appeared in the skies above Tokyo. The city, built of wood, paper, and bamboo, stretched endlessly beneath them. Nearly 9 million people lived in Japan's capital, more than London, more than Berlin, and on this night the Americans had come with one goal: to set it ablaze. Inside each bomber, crews prepared the new M69 incendiary clusters, thousands of napalm bomblets packed tightly in their bays. At the signal, bomb bay doors opened and the first canisters tumbled into the darkness. Unlike conventional explosives, napalm didn't shatter buildings. It ignited them. Each cluster released nearly 40 small bomblets, scattering across entire districts. When they burst open, jets of flaming gel sprayed outward, splattering on rooftops, walls, and streets. The gel clung and burned, impossible to extinguish. In seconds, block after block caught fire. Flames leapt from one wooden home to another, spreading faster than anyone could react. Within minutes, Tokyo was no longer a city. It was an inferno. The Americans had planned the raid with precision. They targeted the eastern, most densely populated neighborhoods of Tokyo, where working-class families lived in cramped houses. Here, Japan's cottage industries thrived. Small machine shops, textile mills, and assembly lines, all hidden within civilian neighborhoods. LeMay believed destroying these areas would cripple Japan's war effort. The human cost, however, would be catastrophic. The fires soon merged into a firestorm. Winds of hurricane force roared through the streets, sucking oxygen into the inferno. Temperatures reached 1,800 degrees Fahrenheit, hot enough to melt metal, to boil water in seconds, to incinerate human beings where they stood. Eyewitnesses spoke of people being lifted off the ground, pulled into the flames by the sheer force of the firestorm. Others described canals and rivers clogged with the bodies of those who had tried to escape the heat. One survivor, a schoolgirl at the time, later remembered, "The fire moved faster than we could run. The air itself was burning. People fell all around me, their clothes and hair on fire. I thought the world had ended. Civil defense forces tried to resist, but napalm mocked their efforts. Water buckets evaporated before reaching the flames. Fire breaks, meant to stop blazes from spreading, failed as napalm bombs leapt across entire streets. By midnight, much of eastern Tokyo was a sea of flames. The roar of the fire was so loud it drowned out even the sound of the bombers above. Pilots later reported they could smell burning flesh from the air. For Japan's military leadership, the attack was a shock unlike anything they had faced before. Explosive raids could be repaired, factories rebuilt, soldiers redeployed. But here, the very fabric of the city was gone. Hundreds of thousands of homes destroyed, families wiped out, and entire districts erased in one night. The Army and Navy had no answer. Their fighters had failed to intercept the low-flying B-29s. Their flak batteries could not stop the endless waves of bombers. Against napalm, even the most disciplined civil defense units were powerless. By dawn, the scale of the devastation was revealed. 16 square miles of Tokyo lay in ashes. Over 100,000 people were dead, burned, suffocated, or drowned in boiling canals. 1 million more were left homeless. It was the single deadliest night of the Second World War. Yes, even deadlier than Hiroshima, even deadlier than Nagasaki. In a single raid, napalm had killed more people than the first atomic bomb. For survivors, the shock was indescribable. Families searching for loved ones found only ashes. Streets they had walked every day no longer existed. Entire neighborhoods had been erased from the map. One Japanese doctor walking through the ruins later wrote, "I saw bodies piled like charcoal. The smell of death and smoke filled the air. There were no screams anymore, only silence." The world would later remember Hiroshima and Nagasaki as symbols of destruction. But for the Japanese, it was Tokyo's firebombing that first showed the true terror of America's new weapon. And this was only the beginning. Napalm would not stop at Tokyo. City after city, night after night, the flames would return. For the Japanese people, every sunset brought the same question: Which city would burn next? The firebombing of Tokyo was not an isolated strike. It was a blueprint. General Curtis LeMay and his bomber command now knew napalm could cripple Japan in a single night. And so, in the weeks that followed, the raids expanded. Osaka, Nagoya, Kobe, Yokohama. The names read like a map of fire. Each city became a test ground for napalm's destructive power. By June 1945, 58 Japanese cities had been attacked with incendiaries. Entire industrial hubs were erased, and with them, tens of thousands of civilians. The shock for Japan's leadership was profound. Military planners had always assumed that civilian morale would withstand the bombings, that the Japanese people, bound by loyalty to the emperor, would endure anything. But napalm created conditions unlike anything Japan had faced before. Fires didn't just kill, they displaced millions. Families were torn apart, children orphaned, workers unable to continue in their trades. The fabric of Japanese society was unraveling. Even Emperor Hirohito, normally shielded from the realities of the war, was reported to have been shaken by the destruction. Advisors showed him aerial photographs of Tokyo reduced to ash. The emperor is said to have murmured that Japan's capital looked like a scorched field. For the Americans, napalm raids were brutal but effective. Losses among B-29 crews plummeted under LeMay's new tactics. Flying low at night, stripped of guns, the bombers could carry heavier loads and avoid the worst of Japanese defenses. The raids became routine. Pilots referred to them as milk runs, though the destruction they caused was anything but routine. Every mission meant another city erased, another population left stunned and broken. In one raid over Osaka in June, 3,800 tons of incendiaries were dropped in a single night. Nearly a quarter of the city was destroyed, and 10,000 people died in flames. Survivors recalled the fire consuming entire neighborhoods in minutes, the sky turning orange, the ground cracking under heat. Napalm didn't just kill, it humiliated Japan's defenses. Anti-aircraft gunners watched helplessly as fire spread faster than they could respond. Fighter pilots often launched too late, unable to climb to altitude before the waves of B-29s had already released their payloads. Japanese soldiers stationed in bombed cities wrote despairing reports. One noted, "We were armed to repel invaders, yet what weapon can fight fire? We had rifles, we had courage, but against this we had nothing." This sense of helplessness spread through the population. For the first time, many Japanese civilians began to question the government's insistence that the war could still be won. The turning point came not only in the devastation of individual cities, but in the cumulative effect. By mid-1945, an estimated half of Japan's urban population had been displaced. Millions were homeless, living in makeshift camps or rural areas. Food shortages deepened. Disease spread. Yet even as cities burned, Japan's military leaders clung to the idea of fighting on. Their strategy was to make an invasion of the home island so costly that the Americans would negotiate peace. But napalm made this strategy increasingly unrealistic. If the Americans could destroy cities without setting foot on Japanese soil, what hope was left? For ordinary Japanese families, life became a cycle of fear and despair. Children carried fire buckets to school. Families slept in clothes ready to run at the sound of sirens. Many sought refuge in rivers or canals, only to perish when napalm turned water into boiling death traps. We thought the water would protect us, but the heat was unbearable. I saw people jumping into the canal, only to never rise again. It was as if the water itself was on fire. By the summer of 1945, America had created a new kind of warfare, one that targeted not just armies or factories, but entire populations. The napalm campaign showed that a modern city, no matter how vast, could be destroyed in a single night. The Japanese were shocked not only by the weapon itself, but by the relentlessness with which it was used. Night after night, city after city, the B-29s returned. There was no safe place left in Japan, and yet the worst was still to come. Because as napalm reduced cities to ashes, another weapon, far deadlier, far more infamous, was being prepared in secret. But even before Hiroshima and Nagasaki, napalm had already proven one horrifying truth: America could burn Japan into surrender. By July 1945, Japan was a nation of ashes. Tokyo, Osaka, Nagoya, Kobe, all burned. Smaller cities like Toyama, Fukui, and Shizuoka had been flattened in single raids. More than 60% of Japan's urban area lay in ruins. And at the center of this devastation was one weapon: napalm. The climax of the incendiary campaign came in the summer months, when LeMay's bombers conducted near-nightly raids. On July 26th, for example, more than 300 B-29s struck cities across Honshu, dropping thousands of tons of incendiaries. It was systematic, relentless, designed not just to destroy industry, but to break the will of a nation. By now, the Japanese people lived in constant dread. Sirens and the low drone of engines in the night meant one thing: fire. Families carried bundles of belongings, ready to flee. Children clutched wooden tags with their names and addresses, so their bodies could be identified after raids. One survivor later recalled, "Every night we asked ourselves, will it be our turn? Will we burn tonight?" For Japan's leaders, the shock turned to despair. Their air defenses were shattered. Ammunition was scarce. Their fighters were no match for the endless waves of B-29s. And yet, surrender was unthinkable. The military clung to the hope of one last battle, that if America invaded, Japan could inflict such losses that the enemy would relent. But napalm made invasion unnecessary. The Americans didn't need to land troops to destroy Japan. They could do it from the sky. We scorched and boiled and baked to death more people in Tokyo on that night of March 9th-10th than went up in vapor at Hiroshima and Nagasaki combined. It was a shocking admission, one that revealed the cold calculation behind the firebombing campaign. And yet, napalm was not enough to force surrender. Despite the destruction of more than 100 cities, Japan's military government refused to yield. The people suffered, the cities burned, but the war continued. It was only after the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki in August 1945, combined with the Soviet Union's entry into the war, that Japan finally capitulated. But here lies the crucial truth. By the time the first atomic bomb fell, napalm had already killed far more people. Tokyo's firebombing alone claimed over 100,000 lives in a single night, more than Hiroshima. Across all of Japan, incendiary raids took the lives of nearly 500,000 civilians. For those who lived through it, napalm left scars that went beyond the physical. Survivors described dreams haunted by fire, by the screams of neighbors, by the sight of entire families consumed in flames. One elderly man, remembering his childhood in Osaka, said, "The fire was alive, it chased us, it did not stop. Even today I still smell the burning." The shock was total. The Japanese military, once proud of its resilience, admitted privately that napalm had broken their ability to defend their homeland. Against fire, no army could stand. The resolution of this story is a bitter one. Napalm had proven its effectiveness, but at a cost that horrified even some of those who used it. In the years after the war, historians and moral philosophers would debate whether the firebombing of Japan was a necessary step to victory, or one of history's darkest war crimes. But for the Japanese of 1945, the shock was immediate and undeniable. Their cities had been turned into furnaces, their homes, their families, their very sense of security, all reduced to ashes. And though the atomic bomb would overshadow it in history, napalm was the weapon that truly broke the back of Japan's cities and left survivors forever haunted by the nights when fire fell from the sky. When the guns fell silent in August 1945, Japan was a land scarred by fire. Entire neighborhoods existed only as memories. Over 8 million civilians were left homeless. Nearly 500,000 had died in the incendiary raids, most burned alive by napalm. And yet, in the shadow of the atomic bomb, the world largely forgot this earlier terror. Hiroshima and Nagasaki became the symbols of destruction, while the firebombings, deadlier in sheer numbers, faded into the background of history. Here is the surprising truth. In many ways, napalm shocked the Japanese more than the atomic bomb. Why? because it was relentless. Hiroshima and Nagasaki were single events, terrible and decisive. But napalm came night after night, city after city, burning everything it touched. Survivors never knew when or where it would strike. To them, it felt like the entire nation was doomed to burn. Even General LeMay years later admitted, "If we had lost the war, we would have been prosecuted as war criminals." It was a rare and chilling confession from the very man who ordered the raids. Napalm itself did not vanish with the war's end. Instead, it became one of the most controversial weapons of the 20th century. From Korea to Vietnam, it returned again, leaving fire and horror in its path. The same weapon that shocked Japan in 1945 continued to shape the world's conscience for decades. For Japan, however, the scars were permanent. Cities were rebuilt, yes, but the memories never faded. Generations grew up hearing their grandparents speak of firestorms, of skies glowing red, of rivers boiling, of a nation brought to its knees not by nuclear blasts, but by oceans of fire. Today, as we look upon the glittering towers of Tokyo, Osaka, and Nagoya, it is easy to forget that these very streets once burned hotter than furnaces, that families once fled through walls of flame, that napalm, a weapon designed to stick, to burn, to consume, changed history in ways even the atomic bomb could not. The story of napalm reminds us of the terrible cost of war, the line between victory and atrocity, and the fragility of human life when fire rains from the sky. If this story moved you, if it made you think differently about the hidden chapters of World War II, don't let it be forgotten. Subscribe to the channel, share this video, and join us as we uncover more stories that history tried to bury, because the past is not just about what happened, it's about what it means for us today.